The past isn't dead. It's just buried, waiting for someone crazy enough to dig it up. And today, that's us. This is the bone-chilling, blood-soaked mystery of the Elbridge family, a legacy so dark, the mountains themselves tried to erase it. Deep in the hollows of Appalachia, between Jackson County, Kentucky, and the Virginia border, there's a crooked square on century-old maps. That's all that's left of the Elbridge homestead. But if you try to find it now, you'll walk straight into a graveyard of shattered bricks and a collapsed foundation strangled by roots. The forest didn't just reclaim it, it buried it like it knew what happened there should never be found. The first clues weren't in police files. They were in whispers, scraps of gossip buried in church logs, sealed birth certificates, and one nearly invisible 1869 census entry written so faint you'd think it was meant to vanish. It named Jonah Elbridge, age 38, farmer. His wife, Mary, just 17. Under children? One chilling word. Expected. Fast forward to 1880. Jonah is gone. Mary's still there, now listed as the head mistress. Living with her, 7 children. All named Elbridge. No other adults. And under relation to head of house for every child? Unknown. Officially, Jonah died of natural causes. But in 1972, historians cracked open the doctor's personal journal and uncovered the truth. There was nothing natural about what I saw in that house. He died with his eyes wide open. Pupils pinned. Mouth packed with wax. And Mary refused to bury him for 3 days, said she was waiting for a sign. 15 years later, railroad surveyors crossed through the valley. One of them scribbled a note in his private log, a note so disturbing, it turned this already haunting family mystery into something far, far darker. Imagine you're standing in the middle of an Appalachian forest, and you hear singing. But not in English. Not in any language you know. That's exactly what a railroad surveyor's field book, still locked away in a museum basement in Corbin, warns: avoid the Elbridge Ridge. He claimed the voices came from the trees at night. The locals? They just said, it's the girls practicing hymns. But he knew better. From that moment on, the Elbridge family didn't just vanish from official records, they started appearing only when disaster struck. Dead livestock. Wells sealed overnight. Children who went visiting and never returned. And yet, no one ever accused them out loud. They were just them folks up the ridge. Then came 1901. 3 men clearing brush found something so disturbing it froze them in place. A white dress, perfectly clean, draped across a wooden frame near the old Elbridge ruins. Inside the bodies? Human hair. Sleeves? Sewn shut. And stitched in blood-red thread across the chest. The bride returns when the son is ready. 3 years later, the Elbridge name surfaces again, this time tied to the last known government visitor to leave their property alive. Her name was Martha Caldwell. Martha wasn't an investigator. She wasn't even looking for trouble. She was just a field nurse, checking on births and home conditions for the new Public Welfare Mothers Act. Her trip to Elbridge Hollow? Just another stop on her spring inspection route. But she never spoke about what happened. The truth only came out decades later, when her ledger was discovered in the attic of a government storage barn in 1967. Dated April 14, 1904, her handwriting was tight and rushed. Arrived at ridge by foot. Air close. Forest quiet, too quiet. No sound but my shoes on dry soil. House visible from path. Structure crooked. Roof sagged. Smell of turpentine and elder root. She knocked on the door. It opened, just enough for a girl to appear. No older than 12. Bare feet. A dress thin as paper. Martha wrote. Child would not speak. Eyes glassy. Not unkind, just watching. And that's where the entry ends. The girl didn't speak, just turned and walked deeper into the house. And Martha followed. Inside, the air was heavy, pine, wax, and something that smelled like iron. Every window was blocked with bundles of dried plants, tied with strips of animal sinew. She wrote. Multiple girls inside. All identical. No male voices. In the corner, an older woman, powdered face, sitting silent in a chair, humming. A black pot boiled on the hearth. Something inside had teeth. Every wall had mirrors, but every mirror was turned toward the wall. They offered her tea. She refused. Then came the newborn. A swaddled bundle, too still. Skin, grey. The girl holding it grinned, all her front teeth missing. Martha left as fast as she could, but at the bottom of the page, in darker, shaking ink, she scrawled. This is not a family. This is a vault. Something is kept here. 2 days later, she was back at her district station. She refused every ridge assignment from that day forward. She never left her hometown again. Locals said she changed, pale, silent, until she died in 1911 at just 36 years old. Cause of death. Exhaustion of unknown origin. The ridge was never inspected again. But 5 years later, it came back. A group of boys hunting near the ridge saw them, a line of girls in white, standing in the tree line. Perfectly still. Staring. The boys ran. One tripped. When he looked back, the girls were gone. But something else was in the dirt. A human tooth. Smooth. Still warm. By 1919, the whispers had reached the Whitley County Courthouse. For decades, people avoided Black Hollow. But now, 2 children were gone. Samuel Rayburn, 9. Betty Jo Clemens, 7. Cousins. Last seen heading toward the Elbridge boundary after church. The trail ended at a dry creek bed. No footprints. No torn fabric. Nothing, except Betty Jo's bonnet, caught in a thorn bush. The inside? Wet. Not rain. For Deputy Franklin Harker, war vet, limp, short temper, that was the final straw. He'd heard the old warning from his grandmother. That ridge is where God left off, and something else took over. So he filed a petition. Deputy Harker wasn't going to wait. He pulled a rare legal card, forced homestead inspection, on charges of suspected abduction and unlawful burial. The judge signed. But not a single sheriff would go. So Harker grabbed 2 civilians, dogs, shovels, and guts of steel, and they rode up the ridge. What they found? Never officially spoken about again. In 1962, a courthouse fire exposed part of the burned report. And it's worse than you think. It reads: House unoccupied on entry. Doors unlatched. Food still warm on the table. Numerous hand-carved dolls upstairs, faces resembling real people. One stitched name, Betty Jo. No adult bodies. No living residents. Then they found it. A cellar door hidden under the hearth. Covered in boards. The smell, rotten metal. Inside, 11 wooden crates. Each one stuffed with fabric, roots, and preserved human remains. Infants. Children. 1 adult female. At the bottom, in pencil, not typed. The eyes are all open. The next year, the Elbridge name vanished from the census. Official story? They migrated to unknown territories. But there were no tickets. No sales. No trace. The house was boarded up, the path wrapped in barbed wire. Locals swear the ridge still hummed at night, a low, bee-like drone. And every October, 3 black feathers would appear on the church door. When asked, the pastor said, "It's their way of reminding us the Elbridges were never gone. They just sank deeper." Then, 1937. Nearly 20 years after the failed raid, a man stumbled from the tree line behind Pine Knot General Store. Barefoot. Bleeding. Barbed wire twisted around his arm. His name, Arlen Buckner. Moonshiner. Drifter. Bootleg runner. A man known in 3 counties. But today, he was unrecognizable, filthy, shaking, missing several fingernails. The only words he could manage, over and over. She watches, even from the dirt. Doctors examined him. No burns. No still explosion. And then, no alcohol in his system. No burns. Just deep, deliberate cuts across his forearms, old scars mixed with fresh ones. And a brand on his back. Not fire, something carved. 3 interlocked triangles. Nobody recognized it, except one person. Miss Edith Mays, the postmaster, the oldest in town. She hadn't spoken the Elbridge name in years. But when she saw it, she went pale. That's theirs. The mark they gave to boys they kept. Arlen was locked away in the state hospital at Danville after violent screaming fits. Always triggered by fresh bread or the sound of creaking wood. Most days, they kept him sedated. But one night, the drugs wore off. And with his own blood, he scrawled 5 words on the wall. Do not bury the dead. That same week, a social worker started digging into his past. She found whispers that he'd once carried an old land deed, dated 1881, signed by Virgil Elbridge. The map? Never found. But months later, 2 graves dug up near Black Hollow. Both empty. The sheriff refused to comment. Miss Edith gave one last statement before she died. The Elbridges never left us. Some bloodlines don't end. They just dry up, waiting for the right mouth to drink again. Arlen Buckner died in 1943. Cremated. But before that, the mortician noticed something. The scar where the mark had been. Healed. Yet the symbol still showed beneath the skin, like it was growing. And then, our next lead. The last surviving Elbridge heir, and the letter he left before disappearing into the mountains. Spring, 1954. Frankie Bell, Pine Knot's only barber, calls the sheriff. Cleaning out a back room he'd rented to travelers, he finds a bundle in the chimney flue. Inside, an oilcloth satchel, soot-stained. A rusted harmonica. A folded, yellowed letter signed simply E. The handwriting, tight, frantic. The ink, faded, but clear. I write this with the last of my fingers. The rest she took, said I wouldn't need them in the next life. Only my eyes, so I can keep watch. No name for she. But the postscript? I buried Mama 4 times. She never stayed down. Frankie turned it over to the sheriff. But by morning, the letter was gone. Vanished from the evidence file. No official record left. Only Frankie's memory. And a single photograph he'd snapped for insurance. The sheriff in charge, Dale Cormick, 2 months later, resigned. Left Kentucky. Last seen in Ohio, panhandling outside a church. But the year wasn't done with us yet. 2 schoolboys, messing around along the Cumberland River, find something buried in the mud. An Elbridge family locket. Inside? Not a photo. A lock of black hair, preserved, fresh. The coroner took one look and wrote a personal note. If this hair is as old as the locket, something unnatural is keeping it that way, or someone is. By 1957, the whispers came back. Hikers in the hills above Pine Knot saw her. A woman in grey, barefoot, standing still, face blurred by shadow. Always watching. Always from the ridge. Back in town, Reverend Albie Wren started warning his congregation. Not every grave stays buried. Some families bind the soul to the soil, if it suits their hunger. He was fired that winter. Declared mentally unfit to preach. A month later, they found him sitting in the middle of Route 92. Naked, weeping, clutching a human jawbone. His chest smeared in blood, 3 triangles. Fast forward to 1963. Deputy Clara Wills, fresh from Louisville, thought it was all superstition. Witches. Cursed bloodlines. Nonsense. That was, until the call came. screaming from under the church floor. The old oak chapel, abandoned since 1918. Locals said the Elbridges built it, then shut it down after a boy was found hanging in the bell tower. No ladder in sight. Clara expected raccoons, maybe bored teenagers. Instead, she found something she'd never unsee. The crawl space wasn't just dirt. It had been dug out, a secret shelter. And inside, a girl. Not quite grown. Not quite a child. Thin. Filthy. Matted hair. Mouth sewn shut. She was alive, barely. When Clara tried to speak, the girl clawed at the dirt and unearthed two things: a faded cloth doll and a worn Bible. Its pages? Every word inked in red. Every single name ended in Elbridge. And every single one carried the same curse. A girl was found, wrists branded with 3 interlocked triangles. But above her bed was something worse, a second mark, burned deep into the wood. She breathed like she was pulling air through the roots beneath the floorboards. Doctors stitched her up. She never spoke. Never cried. Never blinked. Her heart monitor spiked when the lights went out. Her pupils widened, not like a human's, but like a predator's, almost feline, as if she belonged in the dark. Then the black government sedans arrived. No sirens, no words, just men in suits, flashing documents, taking the girl away. The church was boarded shut. They sealed the church. They never sealed the truth. Detective Clara Pro fought to uncover what happened, but 3 weeks later, she was removed from the force. Years later, on her deathbed, she left her niece a single recorded statement: she wasn't hiding, she was guarding something. In 1969, the county approved demolition of the old Elbridge well, a chained, rusted relic at the edge of an overgrown graveyard. Walter Greaves, a military engineer who feared nothing, was sent to do the job. When his hand touched the bricks, he froze. They were warm. They were humming. Then he felt it, the heartbeat. The well itself was beating. Walter tried to dismiss it as groundwater vibrations, until he chipped at one of the bricks and the brick didn't crack, it bled. Thick, black-red liquid oozed out, smelling of wet iron and herbs. He backed away and phoned in his report. By morning, his contract was cancelled without explanation. He left Pine not within a day, but the nightmares followed him for decades. "I'm always falling," he said. "Not down, but sideways, like the earth's being turned, and I'm sinking through layers of bone, teeth, and roots, and at the bottom, something waits." The well wasn't old. It was alive. This wasn't just a well. It was a seal. And whatever lies beneath Elbridge might not stay buried forever. Walter's nightmares always ended the same way. He was falling sideways, sinking through layers of bone and teeth, until he reached the bottom. And there, something was smiling, with someone else's face. The locals knew better than to get close to the Elbridge well. Kids dared each other, but most never crossed the first fence. By 1973, a second fence appeared, not from the county, but from a private company with no name, no logo, and only a single warning nailed to a tree: they drank from her. Now she draws back. Everything around the well died. No birds. No insects. Not even weeds. In 1975, a botanist from Ohio State tested the soil. His report was brief but chilling: the pH levels here are incompatible with life. The soil appears decades dead, but recently disturbed, like something fed beneath it. Within 6 months, his research vanished from the archives. A year later, he died in a house fire. The real breakthrough came in 1977, and it didn't come from the government. It came from a break-in. A group of college students, chasing legends, entered the abandoned Elbridge homestead on an autumn night. The place was a tomb, furniture collapsed, wallpaper peeling, thick with mildew. But in the attic, under loose floorboards, they found something wrapped in deer skin. A ledger. Inside, cramped, feminine handwriting, spanning 1894 to 1921. The front page title read, the vessel's book, sacred womb, sacred root. Every entry was signed only with the initials SEMET, and they all followed the same sequence. A ritual cleansing, in cold water or soil. A male name. And then the phrase, he was taken. The line is pure. I remain open. Page after page. Dozens of them. The girls of Elbridge had not run away. They had not died of illness. They had been taken, and the women wrote it down like inventory. One entry from 1903 froze their blood. Elijah would not stop crying. His eyes turned grey too soon. We wrapped him in river vine and returned him to the well. I bled for 7 days after. Sister said that was holy. Another, from 1918, Thomas bore the mark too early. His teeth came in black. We sang until the roots stopped twitching. The final entry in 1921 was short. Desperate. No more boys left. The seed withers. Sister says we wait for the next one born with the breath. We keep the house and we listen through the trees. No one knows who these sisters were. Handwriting analysis revealed at least 3 different women over several decades. When the students reported the ledger, it disappeared within a week. Officials claimed it was misfiled. But one student, Jody Ramsey, made a photocopy. And years later, she leaked it to a fringe historical review. And that's when the real nightmare began. Jody Ramsey's photocopy led to one horrifying conclusion: the Elbridge women weren't victims, they were keepers. And every burial they recorded was a sacrament. Then came the next revelation, and it didn't come from the police. It came from folklore. In 1980, Dr. Lyle Ransom, a folklorist from West Virginia University, published a thesis with a title as strange as its contents: The Rooted Womb, Appalachian Fertility, and the Legend of the Earth Mother. Buried deep in his research was a disturbing link, a connection between the Elbridge bloodline and a pre-colonial legend about a creature called Mother Root. She wasn't a goddess. She was older. Hungrier. And she didn't want crops or coins. She wanted bloodlines. The earth is not just land, Ransom wrote. It is a breathing archive of names, faces, sins, and wombs. To grow something sacred, you must bury something sacred. He traced the phrase through oral tales from the Shawnee and Melundian peoples: the one who bears the mark must return to feed the root. The mark meant children born with strange signs, black teeth, grey eyes, twisted bones, or the unsettling gift of speech too early. In old law, these children weren't cursed, they were chosen. And they were sacrificed. Then Ransom found the burial records. As far back as 1849, Elbridge infants were interred with their umbilical cords still attached, a ritual detail matching fertility cults across the world. One record was only 5 words: born breathing, buried, twitching. Ransom's conclusion was devastating: the Elbridge women were preservers of this ancient rite, passing it through isolation, oral tradition, and their hidden ledgers. After the paper was published, his career imploded. Colleagues mocked him. Grants vanished. He resigned within a year. And then, he moved, straight into a trailer near the Elbridge land. By 1982, he was gone. When officials searched his property, they found no body, only a circle of dried vines, threaded with baby teeth, hanging from the trees, and a single note pinned to the trailer door. She's still hungry. For years, it was easier to believe the Elbridge tragedies were just the byproducts of Appalachian hardship: poor health care, isolation, infant mortality. But now, there was a far older shadow hanging over McCreary County. By 1983, the truth finally began to bleed through the cracks. Medical records pulled from state archives revealed a 5-generation pattern: miscarriages, infant deformities, unnatural births, all tied to a rotating circle of just 4 midwives. Each one worked exclusively for the Elbridge women. None of them had licenses. None worked in hospitals. And every one of them stopped practicing within months of delivering a child, who was never seen again. The earliest, Granny Elsie, delivered from 1898 to 1910. In her notes, she wrote, "The girls bleed too early, and the babies come too silent." But the mothers always said the same thing: he was not for keeping. In 1934, midwife Lottie Green documented the birth of Ephraim Elbridge, born with 4 fused fingers on each hand, and teeth already erupted. Officially, he died 36 hours later. But in the margins of her journal, Lottie wrote, "The mother did not cry. She smiled. She said, 'The root will drink deep tonight.'" As investigators reinterred descendants and dug through old correspondence, the pattern became undeniable. No male Elbridge child had survived past age 7 in over 100 years. They weren't in cemeteries. They weren't in census records. They vanished. And someone had to help them vanish. That's where the midwives came in. They weren't just birth attendants, they were gatekeepers. They delivered. They diagnosed. And if the child was marked, they handed it over to the women of the house. One midwife, Annalise Ward, retired in 1952. Her daughter later recalled that her mother refused to deliver for anyone else. She said her hands were bound by earth and blood. When her daughter was 10, she saw Annalise bury a baby doll wrapped in hog hide. She said it wasn't pretend. By the 1970s, all 4 midwives were gone, dead or vanished, with no public obituaries. Old phone books showed their final addresses, all within 10 miles of the Elbridge home. Then came the fire. Summer, 1984. A dry lightning storm struck McCreary County, igniting the brushlands. The flames tore across the hills, until they hit the Elbridge orchard. And there, they stopped. Locals rushed to help put it out, but the smell was wrong. Not wood. Not leaves. Something sweeter, rotting, fleshy. When the smoke cleared, the truth surfaced. Beneath the orchard soil, rows of human remains. Tiny ones. Dozens of them. Infant skulls. Rib cages no bigger than a bird's. Some with metal still embedded in the bone. Imagine uncovering a hidden room, and finding this. After a massive fire ripped through an old orchard, investigators stumbled on something straight out of a nightmare, over 40 tiny skeletons buried in neat rows, each one dating from the late 1800s to the 1970s. At first, they thought it was disease or tragedy, but then they saw the bones. Crushed chests. Dislocated spines. One child nailed inside a wooden box and buried vertically. And the soil? Scientists tested it, completely soaked with human blood breakdown. So saturated, nothing can grow there again without extreme chemical treatment. That orchard wasn't just dead, it was poisoned forever. Locals whispered it had been planted in 1867 by Mary Beth Elbridge, and for over a century, only Elbridge women picked its fruit. Pears, apples, cherries, famous for being sweet, but after the fire, every tree died, except 3. A photo buried in the state archives shows them, 3 blackened trees still standing. And inside the hollow of one, burned into the wood from the inside, were 3 words. Womb. Root. Return. No footprints. No tools. And no one could explain how anyone could carve inside a tree. Fast forward to 1985. Only one Elbridge woman remains, Lenora. She's 43 but looks 70. Never leaves her house. Never answers her phone. And when the state checks in after the fire, they find her in a rocking chair, whispering nursery rhymes to no one. Except, there's a locked bedroom she refuses to let anyone enter. Neighbors swear they've heard a child crying in her house during storms. One man even knocked in the rain and heard a voice beg, "Don't let her cut me again." But Lenora lives alone. No birth records. No adoptions. No one ever saw a child come or go. Finally, the state gets a warrant. They break down the door, and inside is the most disturbing scene of the entire investigation. A boy, about 8 years old. Malnourished. Mute. Covered in ritual scars. His arm partially fused. A cleft palate never treated. Burn marks from branding tools. He's sitting in a hand-carved crib meant for a toddler, surrounded by dried herbs and cloth dolls impaled with pins. And in that moment, the mystery of the Elbridge orchard wasn't just history anymore. It was alive. Imagine walking into a room, and the first thing you see on the wall is a message in blood-red paint: "He lives because she sinned." What we found next should have never existed. When police asked Lenora about it, she smiled and whispered, "He was born under the wrong moon. I tried to fix him. Mama said, we don't bury the broken ones anymore. We keep them near. He listens better now." She believed the boy in her house wasn't just a boy, he was the spirit of her brother, who drowned in 1950, under the stars. Lenora was declared mentally unfit for trial. The boy, his real name unknown, was placed into state care and given the name James. James never spoke. Not once. Years later, a nurse wrote anonymously. He never cried. He never laughed. But he would stare at trees like they were telling him secrets. And then, on one full moon night, James carved 3 words into his pillow with his fingernail. Lenora. Elbridge. Return. The investigation exploded when police found the real heart of the mystery, hidden in a false bottom chest in the Elbridge home. Inside, a diary bound in cowhide, pages so brittle they could crumble in your hand. The first page, signed in ink dark as dried blood. Mary Beth Elbridge, October 3, 1871. But this wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, a century-old record of rituals, births, and punishments, passed from mother to daughter. It started simple. My son took sick today. The fever is rising. I placed lamb's ash under his tongue and tied his hands. If he dies, I will root his body beneath the trees. But the entries grew darker. 1 read. The 7th child was born in red moonlight. His eyes did not open. He breathed backward. I took it as a sign. He is to be preserved until she returns. That word, preserved, was written again and again. The truth hit investigators like a freight train. The Elbridge women didn't bury all their dead. They embalmed them, primitive, unsanctified, and hid them in cellars, and even inside trees. Mary Beth wrote about one daughter. She stays soft when bathed in willow water and prayer. But then came the most horrifying passage of all. The first oath was taken beneath the black moon. I offered blood from my own womb, and the trees drank it well. From this line forward, each daughter must preserve one child, one root, one sorrow. Those last words, each daughter must preserve one child, sent forensic teams racing back to the orchard. This time, they didn't find graves. They found sealed wooden containers, hidden inside hollow trees. We cut open a tree, and inside was a child who had been dead for 70 years, but whose skin was still soft. It started with a single sentence, painted across a wall in red. He lives because she sinned. When police questioned Lenora Elbridge, she gave them an answer no one could forget. He was born under the wrong moon. I tried to fix him. Mama said, we don't bury the broken ones anymore. We keep them near. He listens better now. Lenora believed the boy she was raising wasn't just a boy, he was the spirit of her brother, who drowned in 1950. She was ruled mentally unfit for trial. The boy, true name unknown, was placed in state care and given the name James. James never spoke. Not a single word. Years later, a nurse who worked with him said, he never cried. He never laughed. But he would stare at trees, like they were whispering his name. And then one full moon, James scratched 3 words into his pillow with his fingernail. Lenora. Elbridge. Return. When police searched the Elbridge home, they found the real horror, hidden in a false bottom chest. Inside, a diary bound in cowhide, signed in ink dark as dried blood. Mary Beth Elbridge, October 3, 1871. But it wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of rituals, births, and punishments. One passage read. The 7th child was born in red moonlight. His eyes did not open. He breathed backward. He is to be preserved until she returns. That word, preserved, appeared over and over. Investigators realized the Elbridge women didn't bury all their dead. They embalmed them using herbs, alcohol, and something science couldn't identify. And then, in the orchard, inside hollow trees, they found them. Infants. Toddlers. Even a teenage girl. Hair still braided, skin pale and waxy, untouched by time. Each wooden box bore a name, and a single word, offered. In 1986, after the orchard discovery, police dug beneath the main house. Beneath the known cellar, hidden for over a century, was a rusted iron hatch sealed with waxy residue. When it was pried open, a blast of cold air hit them, so cold, one officer vomited. Inside was a chamber, stone walls, dirt floor, and at the far end, an altar carved from black-stained hickory wood. The shelves lining the walls held jars of strange liquid with human remains floating inside, hair, bone fragments, and in one, a perfectly preserved infant hand. Wrapped bundles held things far worse. Baby shoes still wet with unknown fluid. A child's jawbone with stitched flesh clinging. A rosary strung with human milk teeth. But the final discovery broke even the toughest officers. A preserved girl. About 12 years old. Hair braided. Dress intact. Skin elastic, as if she'd died yesterday. But tests proved she'd been dead since around 1910. Pinned to her chest, a piece of parchment. 2 words. Bloodroot daughter. The chamber hadn't been abandoned. The cobwebs were cleared. Candles replaced. Someone, recently, had been here. That's when they learned the truth. In every generation, the eldest Elbridge daughter was chosen to continue the ritual. It wasn't a choice. It was an expectation. And when Nora Elbridge, born in 1931, came of age, she became the next in line. But Nora was different. She refused. And that's when everything changed. Imagine discovering your own mother was grooming you, not for marriage, not for religion, but for a ritual that required you to give birth to a child you'd never raise, and then preserve its body forever. Ruth was devout and soft-spoken, but Nora was sharp, questioning, and drawn to the outside world. She read books, secretly wrote poems, and begged to go to school. When she finally did, she flourished. She told friends her family was just old-fashioned, but the truth was far worse. At home, she was being prepared. Prepared for the preservation. It began on her 14th birthday. A lamb was slaughtered in the orchard. Its blood was collected in a wooden bowl. She was told to bathe in it. When she refused, her mother locked her in the root cellar for 3 days. You must understand, Ruth told her calmly through the door. Your womb is the garden. It must give, and it must take. Nora screamed until her voice gave out. In her secret diary, discovered decades later under the floorboards, Nora described the rituals in chilling detail. They want me to carry one. Not raise it, not love it. Just birth it, then preserve it. They say the family dies if the bloodline is not sealed in sorrow. I will not be my mother's vessel. I will not be my sister's grave. At 16, Nora ran away, disappearing into Tennessee. For years, the family told neighbors she'd gone to a cousin's farm out west. Some believed she'd died. Others suspected she'd simply escaped. But what no one expected was that she would return, not as a victim, but as a hunter, determined to destroy the ritual that had haunted her bloodline for generations. In 1974, she came back under a different name, not as an Elbridge, but as a social worker. She embedded herself in rural Appalachian communities, always watching for certain signs. She wasn't just looking for abuse, she was looking for ritual. When whispers came from Clear Hollow County about a girl named Anna, kept home from school, bruised, never speaking, Nora knew the cycle had begun again. She filed for a welfare check. Visiting the Elbridge homestead, still under Mary Beth's care, she found no children. I've no little ones here, Mary Beth smiled, just me and the Lord. Nora didn't believe it. She returned days later, alone, and broke in through the cellar door. What she found that night would never be written in any police report, because no one would believe her. Inside, near the altar, hung a child's dress, still damp. 2 new jars filled with clear fluid. and a single name scratched into the table, Anna. Carved into a wooden beam, freshly scratched, a single name. Nora took photos, wrote everything down, and that night mailed a parcel to a trusted colleague in Lexington, Kentucky, containing her notes, the photos, and a letter marked, "If anything happens to me, this is why." The next morning, her body was found on the roadside near the Elbridge orchard. Ruled a hit and run. No witnesses. No suspects. No investigation. Her notes never reached the colleague, the package had been intercepted and vanished forever. But evil has a way of leaving something behind. Underneath the cellar, tucked behind loose stones, was a hidden iron box. Inside was Nora's second diary, her last entry written just hours before her death. They don't preserve bodies. They preserve obedience. But rot always rises. And when it does, I hope someone remembers my name, Nora Elbridge, the one who said no. Nearly 15 years later, in 1989, a local contractor named Royce Halter was hired to clear brush near the old Elbridge property line, a job no one else wanted. The soil was rich, the air heavy with stillness. Locals whispered that bad things grew in that dirt. While cutting vines around the foundation of the original smokehouse, his boot struck iron. At first, he thought it was part of the old furnace. But digging deeper, he unearthed a sealed iron box, rusted but intact. When the sheriff pried it open, the smell of mildew and something older than rot filled the room, and inside was the truth the Elbridge family had tried to bury for generations. A small brown leather-bound journal. For black and white photographs from the 1970s. A lock of child's hair tied with a blue ribbon. A torn welfare services badge under the name N. Elbridge. And on the diary's first page, written in shaky cursive, "This is the truth they would not keep buried." The journal, later called the Elbridge Testament, detailed nearly 3 decades of ritual, abuse, and secrecy. It named names. It listed dates. It gave instructions for rituals. It recorded girls who never appeared in school records, but were preserved. At least 9 children were confirmed missing between 1940 and 1975. Only one body was ever recovered, Anna Ray Clevens, aged 9. Reported missing in 1976, she was found buried in a clay pit, preserved unnaturally, embalmed, sealed in wax, wrapped in linen. No coffin. Roots growing around her face like fingers. The cause of death? Never confirmed. Nora's journal didn't just tell a story, it triggered a quiet panic that reshaped an entire county. The Elbridge property was condemned. Their name erased from most public records. Even the deed was buried behind a dummy trust, bought by shadowy hands. Construction permits? Permanently blocked. To this day, locals call the place Quiet Hollow. No one builds there. No one farms there. And no one stays after sundown. Inside Nora's diary, one phrase appeared again and again, always in red ink: "They are not buried, they are kept." Investigators later called it the preservation theory. But Nora's words weren't symbolic. They were instructions. According to her, the Elbridges followed a generational commandment, a blood right whispered only to daughters. Death is a decay of the disobedient. The obedient may remain. If flesh is sealed and spirit spoken to, the body shall not rot, but remain clean for judgment. Obedience meant preservation. Defiance meant disappearance. Her diary contained hand-drawn diagrams of the preparation table, the ingredients for sealing a body, and a recipe for something called purity wax, a grotesque mix of animal fat, herbs, chalk, and ash. Nora wrote, "They dress the girls like dolls, comb their hair. They pray over them until morning. Then they seal the mouth, the eyes, the ears, not to silence them, but to keep them from hearing the world again." One entry chilled investigators more than any other. Dated May 12, 1968, preserved, Ruth, age 8. Memoized all of Psalm 23. Never asked questions. She just smiled. Ruth's name appeared on a missing persons report from 1969. Last seen playing near the creek behind the Elbridge orchard. She was never found. And then there was Esther Elbridge, the last known child born before the homestead dissolved. Now in her 60s, she lives under a protected identity. She spoke once, in a 2004 documentary that was never aired. Her voice barely above a whisper. They said it was love, but love doesn't smell like vinegar and wax. Love doesn't make you sleep beside your sister's glass eyes. Next, we uncover the night of the last ritual, and why Esther believes the land itself still remembers every name it swallowed. When asked, what happened the night it ended? Esther didn't blink. She just said quietly, it didn't end. They just stopped calling it a ritual. She was 9 years old. Late 1975, maybe early 76. That night, her older cousin May had been chosen for completion. The room smelled of wax and cedar. Chalk circles marked the floor. Everyone wore white. No shoes. Nora stood in the back holding a Bible so worn, its pages looked grey. Her grandfather sat in a high-backed chair, eyes closed, lips moving in a language Esther didn't recognize. May didn't cry. She smiled and told Esther, "Don't forget my song." Then she lay down on the table. Esther's mother whispered a prayer, not English, not quite Latin. One by one, the family kissed May's forehead and turned away. Esther didn't. She stared until her mother shoved her aside. Later that night, she crept into the cellar. May's body was gone. The scent of wax lingered. In the corner, behind a jar of bone ash, a small red ribbon sat untouched. Esther took it. Years later, she told police she still keeps the ribbon, sealed in glass, hidden in storage. It smells like Sunday candles and vinegar. But that night, she noticed something else. The ground outside was wet. It hadn't rained in days. Something was seeping up from the earth, like the land itself was leaking. To this day, Esther refuses to go near Gorman Hollow. She says she still hears May humming in her dreams. The same song she was told never to forget. After her confession, authorities tried to dig. They believed they'd found the Elbridge family's burial ground, a moss-covered plot at the far edge of the homestead. Locals called it the Quiet Patch. No animals grazed there. No wildflowers bloomed. Only low, pale grass that never seemed to grow or die. But the dig never happened. In 2006, the Tennessee Historical Preservation Office intervened, citing a buried clause in 19th-century land rights, an obscure religious exemption law, one of the last in the state. The land was legally protected as a site of cultural spiritual significance. Only a living Elbridge descendant could approve excavation. That meant Esther. And she refused. Digging won't change anything, she said. You don't wake sleeping things just to prove they are dead. Still, investigators tried a different approach, non-invasive ground scans. Ground-penetrating radar didn't just find graves, it found something impossible. Child-sized voids in perfect rows. No metal. No coffins. Just shadows beneath the earth. One technician whispered, it's like someone wanted them to be remembered, but never found. 6 months later, a second scan revealed something worse. One of the voids had moved. As if whatever was buried there wasn't anymore. Then came the reports. Visitors claimed to hear humming in the still air. Some smelled wax. Others, vinegar. A sheriff's deputy swore he found a small child's handprint smeared in dust on the back of his cruiser after leaving the site. No children had been anywhere near him. In 2011, the Elbridge land was divided and sold. But not the Quiet Patch. That piece stayed fenced off, with a weathered sign that reads, "By order of heaven and heritage, do not disturb." It's still there. Unmarked. Unexcavated. Utterly still. But in 2017, a local historian cracked the silence. Dr. Marion Coates, folklorist and historian, published a paper titled, Bloodlines in the Soil, Appalachian Ritual and Rural Legacy. It barely made a ripple in the academic world, but in the shadowed corners of Gorman County, it sparked panic. Coates had spent a decade gathering testimonies, land records, and whispered stories, all tracing back, however faintly, to the Elbridge name. Her conclusion was simple and terrifying: the rituals didn't end. They moved. Her research pointed to at least 3 other remote mountain communities, all tied to Elbridge cousins. Each shared the same chilling pattern: unusually high child mortality rates, land deeds with religious exemption clauses, multiple generations on isolated, closed-off plots, no public burials, only private grounds. In one settlement outside Hollow Ridge, 4 children vanished between 1993 and 2004. None were found. The families refused to speak. A retired nurse finally broke the silence to Coates: "We weren't supposed to ask questions, especially about the babies born small and sickly. They'd be gone by the next spring." Then came the photographs. Taken in 1981 by a park ranger, hand-dug stone altars inside a mountain cave, surrounded by melted candles and scorched rock. The markings on the cave walls matched the chalk symbols Esther Elbridge had described from her childhood. Dr. Coates ended her paper with a single sentence: "The Elbridge family did not die out. It scattered, like spores." What if I told you a historian vanished, after finding proof of a ritual that should have died out a century ago? This is Dr. Marion Coates. She spent 10 years chasing a rumor through the Appalachian Mountains. But in 2018, just as she was about to publish her biggest discovery, she disappeared. Her car? Found abandoned near a state park. Inside? Her laptop, a sealed envelope labeled, "Open if I am gone," and a child's red ribbon. That envelope has never been made public. Police called it inconclusive. But locals? They say she got too close, not to a legend, but to something still alive. And if you think that's the craziest part, you haven't met Esther Elbridge. Fast forward to 2019. Esther's 86 years old. Snow-white hair. Voice like steel. She never spoke about her past. Never gave her real name. Until now. An anonymous audio leak hits the internet, 43 minutes long. And from the very first question, you can feel it. Why now, Esther? Why speak after all this time? Her answer: because the soil still remembers, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't. The first 10 minutes? Almost impossible to hear. But then, she starts naming names. Sarah Elbridge. Nora. Ruth. Jeremiah. And then, the bombshell. Yes, the preservation right was real. Yes, she saw it happen. Yes, she saw one of the preserved. When asked what it looked like, she pauses and whispers, "It didn't look dead." That's what I remember most. It looked like it was still waiting. Esther left the Elbridge homestead in 1955, after Nora vanished for the second time. Changed her name. Moved to Ohio. Tried to forget. But the dreams never stopped. The root cellar. Ruth praying over that thing. The smell of salt and lye. Then came the letter. No return address. No signature. Inside, one sentence in her mother's handwriting. The bloodline has not ended. And wrapped in tissue paper? A lock of jet black baby hair, tied with a red ribbon. Esther's last words on the tape still haunt me. They don't need the mountain anymore. They don't need the cellar or the salt. They only need a willing womb, and those are easier to find than you think. 3 weeks later, Esther vanished. Her apartment? Perfectly clean. No signs of struggle. Witnesses? Said she just walked out one night, and never came back. Some swear she was taken. Others say she went willingly. Either way, one fact remains. The bloodline is still unbroken. Imagine a family so secretive, their children exist only on paper, and then vanish forever. When Esther disappeared, rumors exploded through the Appalachian towns. But the whispers weren't from people. Locals swore they came from the woods, the wells, the very dirt. Some claimed they saw a barefoot woman who looked exactly like Ruth Elbridge, walking along a dry creek bed after midnight. Creepy folklore, right? Wrong, because the next discovery was real and verifiable. 2021. 1. A research assistant in Kentucky starts digitizing dusty 19th century ledgers. Most of it normal birthing records, except for 8 births. 2. Same surname, Elbridge. 1970s and 80s. No hospitals. No doctors. No death records. No school enrollments. No social security numbers. These kids were born on paper, and then they were gone. Every entry ended with the exact same note. Preserved in tradition. Name withheld by maternal request. Officials called it a clerical error. But a leaked memo from inside the system told the truth. Pattern appears deliberate. Properties linked to Elbridge estate. Possible generational ritual activity. Recommend escalation. Weeks later, the memo was buried. The whistleblower fired. Gone. Never spoke again. But then, 2023 happened. A midwife in rural West Virginia posts anonymously on a dark trauma care forum. She'd been hired for a private home birth outside Beckley. The family? Quiet. Deeply religious. No paperwork. No questions. Paid in cash. But then she saw something that made her walk out. The baby wasn't for the parents. It was for something else. They called it a vessel for the sealed one. She quit on the spot. 1 week later, a package arrived. Inside? Her missing stethoscope and a lock of jet black baby hair tied with a red ribbon. She moved out of state immediately. The Elbridge tradition didn't die with Ruth. Or Nora. Or even Esther. It adapted. Modern names. Modern methods. New wombs. Same bloodline. Same cost. By 2024, the Elbridge homestead had been abandoned for decades. But no one dared step on the property. Until a drone hobbyist decided to fly over it. This drone pilot wanted epic ruins footage. Instead, he filmed something that should not exist. A YouTuber from Pennsylvania, obsessed with Appalachian ghost towns, decided to do the unthinkable, fly a drone straight over the abandoned Elbridge estate, and into the underground. Sunrise. His drone lifts off from a roadside clearing. The hollow comes into view, overgrown, suffocating with vines. The lone chimney still stands like a gravestone. Then, he sees them. The cellar doors. 2 warped panels, sunken into the ground, cracked open just an inch. He descends. Inside, stone walls, a staircase curling into the earth. At the bottom, not rubble, but a stone altar. Circular. Cracked. Covered in ash and bone fragments. Around it, tiny charred handprints. Child-sized. Burned into the floor. The drone hovers closer. Movement. Something shifts under the altar slab. Not wind. Not an animal. Breath. A puff of white air escapes from beneath the stone, like something exhaling through damp rock. Then, black screen. Feed dead. He thinks it's just signal loss. Drives closer. But at 50 feet, every single electronic device dies instantly. Car. Phone. Remote. All drained. On foot, he finds his drone, smashed. The remote, fried. And carved into a tree, one word, return. He did. Sold his gear. Deleted his channel. Left the state. But he'd already uploaded 3 minutes, 47 seconds of footage. Archivists grabbed it before he could take it down. In the final frozen frame before the cut, if you pause it just right, there's a small handprint inside the lens. The cellar was never explored again. The altar? Still there. Still waiting. The Elbridge curse should have ended in the 60s. It didn't. Because in the archives of Riverview State Psychiatric Hospital, 90 miles away, there's a file. Patient name, Jacob. Age, about 11. Found, wandering Route 83 near Elk Run. No family. No words. Underweight. Fingernails packed with soil. But the nurse didn't fear his silence. She feared his drawings. Every day, Jacob used charcoal to sketch the same crumbling farmhouse, surrounded by tiny black handprints. He wouldn't speak for months, but when he finally did, he whispered a name, and every nurse who heard it still remembers. Jacob never changed his drawings. Always the same house. Same crooked porch. Same dead trees. Same figure in the upstairs window. At first, staff thought it was trauma. But one orderly noticed a strange symbol etched beneath every sketch, an upside-down V, with a dot in the center. A social worker decided to take him back to where he was found. The moment they crossed into old Elbridge territory, Jacob shot upright and started screaming one word, over and over, Mara. Back at Riverview, Jacob spoke in a whisper. She's the one in the dark. She walks backwards. She lives behind the stone. She watches through the walls of wherever you sleep. When asked who Mara was, he said, "My family put her there." Doctors wrote it off as delusion. He was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia, moved to a long-term children's unit, and died 2 years later. No autopsy. But in the final notes from his psychiatrist, one chilling entry. Patient repeated, "It's in our bones." No oh. Mara outside the window. Always watching. Dirt won't stop her this time. Years later, a nurse from his ward published a memoir. She remembered one quiet night when Jacob handed her his last drawing. It wasn't the house. It was bones, tangled in roots, buried deep in the earth, and in the center, the same strange symbol, with a black figure beneath the soil, arms outstretched. What Jacob saw matches something hidden in a journal from 1892, the last confession of Asa Elbridge. Spring, 1892. Asa, the final male heir of the Elbridge bloodline, wrote a journal no one was meant to read. It stayed hidden for almost a century, sealed inside a rusted tin box behind a false wall in the family chapel, a stone ruin half swallowed by roots. The handwriting was uneven, as if written by trembling hands. "I write this in fear," Asa began, "not of man, but of what we kept alive for too long." He confessed the Elbridge family didn't just guard their bloodline, they cultivated it. They called it a covenant of earth, a ritual passed from father to son. But Asa's words turned darker. The children weren't raised. They were planted. Buried in soil for hours. Mouths packed with ash and roots. Left to breathe the damp earth until something in it claimed them. What if I told you, there's a valley where a family fed blood to something buried for centuries, and the one man who tried to stop it vanished without a grave? Asa Elbridge's journal didn't just reveal a curse, it named her. Over and over. Mara. Sometimes he called her a goddess. Sometimes, a punishment. According to Asa, she was born human, centuries before the Elbridges arrived. A bastard child, left to die. But when the rains failed, she rose from the soil. And when they tried to burn her alive, she didn't scream. She smiled. Asa wrote that the valley never belonged to his family. It was always hers. And the only way to keep her asleep was with Elbridge blood. Generation after generation, fed to her through union, death, silence. But Asa broke the pact. "I saw what was left of Mara," he wrote. Her eyes were not eyes. She had no mouth. But I heard her say, "You kept me too long." Roots came from her fingers. She never bled. His last words. "I cannot kill her, but I can stop the seed. I will burn the bones of the children. And I will bury myself far from this hollow." No grave for Asa was ever found. Just a single boot discovered in 1947, still laced, with a blackened shinbone inside. By 1904, the Elbridge name was almost gone, Asa's rebellion had worked. But one cousin remained, Naomi Elbridge. She stayed in the hollow. Isolated. Unmarried. And then, she had a child. No father listed. The birth record reads, infant male. Eyes black. No cry. Locals whispered. His skin was grey. His eyes never blinked. The midwife, Mrs. Harland, never spoke of it until her death in 1933, when her diary revealed one line. That child was not born. It came up. Naomi named him Hiram. She kept him hidden from the world. But the woods knew. By 1912, strange reports started again, travelers claiming the trees moved wrong, and a farm family finding a perfect circle of children's teeth laid out in their field. The hollow was sick again. Naomi knew what had to be done. Following the rites of her grandmother, she prepared an offering. But this time, it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone taken from far away. It was her own son. Hiram was 8 years old when Naomi led him into the family chapel, the same one Asa tried to destroy. She carried a single candle, and a wooden box containing 3 things. A bundle of ash, a cloth soaked in her own blood, and a locket holding a curl of hair from Mara's grave. Standing before the altar, she whispered the final rite of the Elbridge family. In blood through ash, beneath. She buried her own son alive, and the candle over his grave never went out. Naomi's final words echoed in the chapel. In blood through ash, beneath bone, in silence, not birth, we return her home. Hiram was lowered beneath the floorboards. Naomi set a single candle above the packed dirt. The flame didn't flicker. It burned, steady, bright. And it never went out. Decades later, the chapel collapsed into rotten ivy. Locals called the site Sweet Hollow. But nothing grew there, not a weed, not a tree. The soil was dead. In 1986, 2 university students, Claire Morton and Daniel Bly, were researching forgotten Appalachian burial sites. A local rumor led them to the edge of the old Elbridge land. It wasn't much to look at, a tangle of briars, leaning stones, and the decaying skeleton of a chapel half swallowed by the woods. But Claire noticed something strange before they even stepped inside. The smell. Like syrup, rotting flowers, and burnt hair, she wrote in her field notes. She'd been around graves before, but this wasn't rot. This was preserved. While digging through a collapsed wall, they uncovered a small cavity beneath the floorboards. Just big enough for a child. No coffin. No stone. Just hard-packed earth. And in the center, a candle. Still upright. Still perfect. Its wick fresh, as if it had been lit yesterday. Daniel reached toward the hole, ignoring Claire's protests. The instant his fingers touched the dirt, something moved. He swore the ground exhaled, a hot breath that curled around his wrist like fingers. They ran. But the hollow followed. Days later, Daniel collapsed with a fever. Night sweats. He said, a voice whispered in Appalachian German. Bring him back. Blood owes blood. Meanwhile, Claire started finding tiny handprints on the inside of her third-floor dorm window. And twice, she found strands of hair in her backpack, ash blonde, curling at the ends. When they came back to Sweet Hollow, the chapel wasn't destroyed, it was just gone. Claire and Daniel returned with a local historian to finally document the site. But instead of rotting wood and ivy, there was nothing. An unnaturally perfect clearing. No wind. No birds. No bugs. And carved into the soil, a pattern. Not roots, veins. A cradle made of veins. The project died that day. The footage was never released. Daniel dropped out. Claire disappeared into academia, writing a private paper titled Inheritance of Soil. It was never made public. Claire's real name? Marjorie Elbridge. Born in 1943 to a mother who refused to speak the family name. Raised far from Sweet Hollow. But every year, during the blood moon, she felt it, a bone-deep ache, whispers in her sleep. Then in 1992, she got the letter. An anonymous estate transfer. The land was hers. She knew exactly where it was. Marjorie prepared like a warrior, a cross, salt, a 7-day fast. But when she stepped onto the Elbridge clearing, the ground recognized her. No chapel. No house. Just a figure waiting. An old man with wheat-colored hair, sunken eyes, and a smile that split too far. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Marjorie dropped to her knees and wept. That night, she made her choice. She built a fire, not to destroy, but to contain. She burned everything. The soil. Her blood-written letters. Family Bibles in a dead language. Even locks of her own hair, braided into bones beneath the oldest tree. The smoke rose. The wind screamed. 3 days later, hikers found her, naked, burnt, alive. For the next 11 years, she never spoke. Doctors said shock. Others whispered fugue state. But those who looked into her eyes swore she wasn't confused. She was containing something. This candle hasn't been lit for 20 years, and the moment it's gone, something wakes up. For decades, Marjorie Elbridge kept anything beside her bed, a single, unlit candle. No one knew why. But in 2004, the night she died, 2 nurses swore they heard roots cracking through stone beneath the building. And one nurse? She claims she saw a little girl, 7 years old, dressed like she stepped out of the 1800s, just smiling at the end of the hall. Today, we're going back to Sweet Hollow, the most cursed place you've never heard of, to uncover what's been buried for over a century. The map still shows Sweet Hollow, but the town is dead. The post office? Closed since 1987. The church? Burned to the ground. Official cause? Electrical fault. Unofficial cause? There hasn't been electricity here in decades. Hikers avoid it, not because they are scared, but because they say the land itself rejects you. The ground shifts under your feet like it's breathing. The trees grow in perfect circles, all pointing toward one spot. In the center? A bare patch of earth that never grows back. No birds. No animals. And in winter, it's warm. In 2022, 6 ghost hunters live-streamed from Sweet Hollow, laughing, taunting the spirits. By midnight, the camera was still rolling, but everyone was gone. They were found hours later, scattered in different parts of the forest, unconscious, barefoot, with severe burns on their feet. No fire. No explanation. And the footage? Uploaded, deleted, re-uploaded, then vanished forever. But Sweet Hollow doesn't just hide secrets, it whispers them. If you walk here after dark, people say you hear digging beneath the soil. Not shovels, hands. And sometimes, on nights with no wind, a single voice drifts through the trees. A little girl's voice, tell them we're still here. Here's where it gets crazier. There's still any active property deed tied to the Elbridge family. It's hidden in an anonymous trust. But the email linked to it contains the number 1891. That's the year Catherine Elbridge disappeared, before her own brother claimed she ran into the woods and never came back. They say the land never forgot her. And neither did what lives beneath it. Now you know why the Elbridges disappeared. Why there are no graves. Why their name was erased. This was never about hiding history. It was about trapping something. Because a curse doesn't end when the family dies. It ends when the last person refuses to feed it. And somewhere in Sweet Hollow, someone still is.